Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and you know, it's May 2025 and BU is just around the corner. And for those of you that don't know what BU is, that stands for Bernina University. It's where we get all our smarts once a year when Bernina premieres new product, when they introduce new accessories and all kinds of stuff. And so there are some really fun things coming out this year. And this year I know that there are some totally fun things, and I know there's going to be some surprises and all of that, but we will make sure that we take you along with us because you know I always do the girl on the street interviews and reporting from there, right? But the most important thing is not the product or the classes, it's what we wear. And so this year, just like last year, there are themes. And so the first day is to wear something in the colors of the BU brochure that went out in April. That's one. Then there's Show Your Store Spirit Day, where you wear like a BERNINA of Naperville shirt, or if you're not BERNINA of Naperville and you're BERNINA of Oklahoma City, wear BERNINA of Oklahoma City something, right? And then we have BERNINA Day, and so I made the McCall's pattern, the Gertie pattern. It's a pinup blouse. I've done it for a few items, but for this, I actually turned it into a dress. So that is kind of fun, and I can't wait to wear it. I also did the Sally Tomato belt with it and used the BERNINA fabric. So that is definitely the kind of thing I'm only going to wear once in my life, or maybe twice, like next year when they have it again, right? And then Mood Fabrics came out with a free pattern called the Taos dress, and I loved it. And I really wanted to make it in black, but I also wanted to make something colorful. So I used some Heather Bailey fabric with peacocks on it, and I turned it into that dress. I just need to hand sew the buttons on that one, and it's going to be great. But I have had something in the drawer sitting around for a long time. It's Ruby Star, kind of a homespun woven type of fabric, and I wanted to do some embroidery on it and whatever. So I worked on that, but part of this pattern calls for a flounce. And I really, the hardest part about cutting like a slippery rayon lining and some higgledy-piggledy fabric is, like you got to cut it, then you got to carry it around and sew it and whatever, and it can get distorted. So a flounce is kind of like a piece of fabric that's been cut in like a circular formation so that when you stretch it out, it looks like a ruffle or a flounce. So that is what I wanted to show you how to make today. And do I have my 990 in the background here? Well, I actually use my 990 as a scanner because it will proportionately scan whatever's in my hoop, and then I can open it up in the BERNINA embroidery software. Then I can digitize the flounce, and then I can send it back to the machine and stitch it out. No handling involved. All right, let's get to it. I'm excited to show you this technique. So I'm not gonna, film and do step by step making this entire dress here. I'm making view A, but I've made a couple alterations. One of them is I decided to put a panel insert in the top part of this dress. So I've already embroidered this. This was done on my 990, but this design would fit into a maxi hoop as well if you have a 7 series. This is an altered design from OESD. It was from Gilded Garden, and I just kind of made my own configuration of the design. So that's one thing. And so then what I did is I took the pattern piece and spliced it here so that I would have a little blue on each side because I didn't want the whole front of the dress to be the white. I wanted under here, and of course the back side of the dress is going to be this fabric here. So that's one change. Now, one thing that I should have done that I didn't do, I didn't think it through all the way, I guess, is that the back, if you'll notice on the pattern tissue, do you see how we've got a placement line for this flounce? Well, I should have done this in two pieces so that I could have just inserted my flounce in that seam because that's what I plan to do for the front side. But nonetheless, this is what I've created, so this is what I'm going to live with. Now, the pattern instructions actually have us make the flounce and then sew it on by hand afterwards. I'm not going to be doing that either. So what I'll do is something in between. So I'm going to make my flounce and then I'm going to figure out a way to kind of top stitch it on the dress once we're done. So the flounce, let's talk about that. The flounce is in two pieces. There's the back part of the flounce, which you see there, piece number 4, and piece number 3 is the front of the flounce. And then there's a seam that, keeps them together. No problem. In fact, this is so not a problem because I I struggle a little bit with the wiggliness of this fabric, and my lining is a rayon lining and it's super slippery. And sometimes when we cut something like this that's in the round, it really is very hard to be accurate, even with a mat and rotary cutter, like I would set up to cut this. But this piece, both of these pieces individually fit into my Bernina giant hoop, which I'll bring over to show you here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece, spray the back of my pattern tissue to make it temporarily stick, and I'm going to place this into my hoop, and I'm going to scan the hoop using the scanner on the 990 and import that into my Bernina embroidery software so that I can digitize and sew my flounce in the hoop. So there's a couple things that I want to do for pattern prep before I do this, and that's because I'm going to stitch this in the hoop. I actually need to create my stitching lines because in a traditional pattern like this butterick pattern, what these lines are the cutting lines, right? But I'm not going to cut this in the hoop. I'm not going to get that fancy, but I do want to trace that seam allowance. And butterick patterns like this typically are 5/8 of an inch of a seam allowance. And if you're ever nervous or you don't know, when we look at our instructions here, lines shown are cutting lines. However, 5/8 of an inch seam allowances are included. So we're going to we're going to trace 5/8 of an inch away from that edge. And you can use a little seam gauge like this. And I just kind of dot it and then I connect it. But I don't even think I need to connect it. I can just connect it with the dots in my software rather than drawing a line. And this is what I would do to prepare both pattern pieces. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that this part of the pattern is the actual hem of the flounce right there. And I kind of would like this to be a little bit longer. So I might actually stitch on this line rather than this one. But, if you're doing something like this, that's where you would, before you would do this, you would determine any alterations and that kind of thing that you need on your garment before you get started. So for me, the seam allowance that's most important is this one along these edges, but this I'm going to keep long. So I have just got my pattern tissue placed into the giant hoop, and I've also made sure that it fits within the area of the hoop and it's placed there because we don't want to go to scan and then the pattern tissue is outside of the stitchable area on the hoop. So now that that's all set and everything is good to go, my machine is recognizing the hoop, blah, 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 I'm going to go ahead and scan. And scanning in the hoop lives at the little eyeball button down here at the bottom left corner of the screen. And of course, we're in embroidery mode, right? And now we're going to touch the scan button and we're going to make sure scanned image is selected from our drop-down menu. And then we're going to hit the green button that says scan hoop. Now, for video purposes, I had the light turned off on my machine. It was glaring too much on my workspace. But when your light is turned off internally on your machine, it's going to turn the light back on to do the scanning because it needs that light to see what it's scanning. And I've put this on time lapse so that the scanning process is going a little bit faster for you than it did for me. Because, of course, with the giant hoop, there's a lot of space to cover when it's scanning. But why would I scan in my Bernina 990 rather than just take a picture of this with my camera and all of that to get it onto my computer? Number one, I can take a scan from my Bernina 990 and open it into my Bernina embroidery software where it's ultimately going to end up anyway. And it's going to scan in true size. Sometimes when I take a picture with my camera, right, I have to do some math to get the picture to present in the software at the exact same size. But this one is going to be perfect. And now it's ready. And now let's go over to the Bernina embroidery software and see how to retrieve this. All right, you can see that was my dress that I was, kind of looking at here. But when you want to retrieve a scanned image from your Bernina 990, you're simply going to pick a new file and then make sure that you select the same hoop that we're working with on the machine. And of course, that's the 990, the giant hoop with my number 26 foot. And I want to view to hoop. Now we're going to retrieve something from our machine. Notice that there are two sewing machine icons there, one with an arrow jumping out of it and one with an arrow jumping into it. We're going to pick the arrow jumping out of it, and we're going to select from our drop-down menu the 990 with the green light next to it. That's the 990 that is online here at my home network. There's another 990 that we have at the store, and that's this one, but this one is the one here at home, and I can tell because it recognizes it through my Wi-Fi connection on the machine. And now that I picked the design from the 990, this icon has changed to the hoop scanning icon. So I'm going to select this. And I have to wait a few moments because it takes a while for the picture to come over. And there it is. And now remember, we made those dots there. So now all I want to do is just trace the design. And I am going to simply use my excess fabric that I have for my dress that's been left over for my flounce. And I need to make 2 of these and 2 of the other one. But for right now, we're working with the back flounce. So we need 2 backs and 2 fronts. The flounce is going to be made out of the blue fabric on the outside, and inside I'm doing a lining. So the other side of this is going to be a creamy lining color for my rayon lining. And all I want to do now is pay attention to these dots, which are my seam allowances, and this line. So let's go to we're using a open curve tool. And I don't want to do any digitizing here because this is how we're going to sew the flounce together. I'm going to sew the flounce around the hem. I'm going to sew the flounce around the area that it gets stitched to the part of the dress on. So that's going to mean I'm doing kind of this shape around this crescent shape. But I will need an open edge to turn it inside out. I'll also need an open edge to sew it. And I have a little trick of how I'm going to do that. And I'll show that to you after we stitch both of our flounces. But we have to make these designs first. So I'm going to start here. So I'm cutting the size 12. So I measured 5/8 of an inch away from the 12 line, and it actually is about right there on that dotted line. So I'm going to make my first stitch just there, like that. Then I'm just going to right click to make this curve. And notice here are my little dots. If you didn't want to add length to this flounce or whatever, you would just cut off whatever they're recommending for the flounce hem. But I wanted to elongate mine just a little bit. So that's why I'm going for the cut line as my sewn line. Okay, so now that I'm there, this is all seam allowance, right? Right here, I don't need that. I'm doing a stitching line. So now my job is to connect these green dots that I made. And this is why I didn't go to extreme measures to connect the dots because I knew I'd be doing it in my software. And now this is where it ends. And now I'm just going to press enter on the keyboard and it put it in the middle of the hoop. It doesn't line up with my pattern, but and I know that it did because of how I traced it and digitized those points around the shape. A little bit of help there to see how it aligns. We can see there that it indeed does. In fact, we can go back to manual. That'll let us move it into position to correlate with what we traced there. But when I stitch this out, I want it to go into the center of the hoop. So I have, you know, that's getting a little close there to the edge of our hoop, but that's how we do it. So now I'm going to save this in a folder that I'll remember. And I'm going to call this flounce back. And then we're just going to repeat this process to do the other flounce. And then I'll show you how to stitch them out. So once we get our design done, we're going to send it to the machine with the arrow jumping into the sewing machine in our software. And I'm going to select my needle. This is just sending immediately to the stitching area. And then we say okay. And then we notice that it shows up over on our machine. This is nothing special as far as stabilizer goes. This is just some stuff that I'm not terribly fond of, like some craft fuse or whatever, that I just put in the hoop to hold the pattern. So I'm not using this to actually stitch my item. I'm going to be using 4 20-inch wide pieces of medium weight tearaway stabilizer to fit my giant hoop. And I'm doing 4 pieces because this is going to be 4 hoopings, 2 for the front flounce and 2 for the back flounce. And I found that this is just the easiest just to take the table to just take the stabilizer off easily. If we do a water soluble, then I have to wash my stuff again and dry it and all of that good stuff. And if I were to use like a leave-in stabilizer, like a poly mesh or something, then that is just adding more bulk to this item. So I think that this is my best plan here. And I'm just going to hoop the stabilizer only, and then I will baste my item into place and then stitch. I am going to lightly spray my hoop, the stabilizer that is. Try not to spray the hoop. And I'm going to be putting my slippery fabric down first. This is my rayon lining. And then this is my leftover fabric here. And I want to be sure that I'm laying these down wrong side up. So this fabric that I'm using, the lighter side is the wrong side, the darker side is the right side. So I'm going to just place this in here like so. And remember, I have to get 4 pieces out of this. I have measured, and I believe I did it so that it was aligned like this. I've got more lining, but I have not one speck left of this light blue. Okay, so now this is going to come over to the machine, and we just have that one simple little piece to stitch, that one line that we digitized. And I have white thread threaded up in the machine. And I'm using my quilt settings for this so that it knots at the beginning and end. I decided that I do want to do basting around the design. And now I'm ready to go. And the basting is just going to keep this in the hoop nice and flat so it doesn't shift on me while I'm sewing. Once the basting is put into place, it's just going to stitch our flounce. And now we need to make another one. Now, we're going to be doing the back piece again, and we have 2 options. We can put our lining down and then put our piece just like we did the other. But if we do that, then we have to mirror the design on the 990. Another option would be to put our piece here first, right side up, and then put the lining down. But I would prefer to have the lining against my work here. So I am going to opt to put the lining into this because it's slippery and it just takes more care. So that's why I'm putting the lining against the 505 stabilizer here. And then remember, we're going to do this one with the light side out rather than the dark side because the dark side is the right side. And we want right sides together. The lining doesn't really have a right or wrong side. Just like that. And now let's mirror the design. We're just going to go into our edit screen and we're going to mirror it right, left. And now we're ready to have a mirrored piece for the other side. Okay, now I'm ready to stitch it out again. I'm sticking with my basting around the design. And sometimes with basting, you may have to do a thread up command. And the thread up command is where we take our thread, hold it, do the needle up down button to pull the bobbin thread up. And this is just so our basting stitches don't come undone. And you might want to make sure that everything is nice and smooth. All right, let's rinse and repeat for the front piece of our flounce. When I was digitizing the back piece, what I failed to mention to you is that when I'm doing my open object tool, I'm using a straight stitch, and my straight stitch is set up to be about 2.5 millimeters. That would be about the same as if I were doing it on my sewing machine. And when I pre-tested this off camera and I stitched out our design, the tension came out looking great on both sides. So for the 2.5 straight stitch, that's all we need here. Some people might use a triple stitch which is this one right here, but we really don't need to do that. So with that said, straight stitch 2.5 millimeters, which is the default in the software here, and then my open object tool. So we just click. Okay, now we're ready to send it to the machine. So the first thing that we want to do after all of our pieces have been embroidered or stitched, however you want to, whatever you want to refer to it as, is we want to prepare a piece like this. Now, this is a front piece right here. This is the left front, actually. So I take my left front piece, put it aside, and I want to show you how I got to this. So we're going to turn our work over, and I'm going to trim about 1/4 of an inch away from the stitching line. I'm not even worried about that basting line. I'm just going to turn, make sure I don't cut anything else under there. And we want to just use our scissors to cut. And I'm sorry, but there was just no better way to do this because I have to use the light thread. So trust me, there's stitching there. And also, I apologize for my lack of a manicure. My hands look particularly gnarly because I'm working on refinishing a furniture piece and oh, it's wreaking havoc on my fingers. Okay, and as we go on this inside curve, we're also going to need to make some little clips into it so that we can make sure it lies flat. So if you've ever done any kind of apparel sewing or three-dimensional sewing, you might be familiar with that. Okay, so we're just going to clip in. Make sure you have like a nice pair of sharp scissors with sharp tips. We want to clip in, but we don't want to cut that stitching. Okay, now we want to carefully peel our 505 stabilizer away from our lining, and we're tearing into this stabilizer and removing it like so. And you can see it kind of comes out of the seam allowance fairly easily. And then to get it out of these areas, we just have to kind of pick it away. So it just takes a little bit of work, but eventually you're going to peel all of this stuff away on all of your pieces. Once you're at this stage, we're going to need to turn it inside out. And these are nice little tube turners and stuff. So I'm just going to feed the blunt end of it in, catch it on the tip, and then we transfer one side to the next. And now we have a flounce. And this is the back right side. So I'm going to give this a pressing on the iron, and it will look equally as flat as that piece. Once we have our front side turned inside out and our back side turned inside out, we're going to pin these together. Now, here's the deal. We're going to leave a small opening in the back on the lining side so that we can sew the top parts by machine. So we're going to take an intersection here, open this up like so, open this one up like so, and pin right sides together. And then and then let's go like like an inch beyond there, like that. And now we're going to stitch Lining this up together and lining this up together right at that intersection. And then we want to go about an inch beyond it. And so now we're going to carefully by machine sew this seam. And we'll do this for both sides of our, or both of our flounces. I'm using a 1/4 inch foot, but this requires a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I will be keeping my seam allowance on that 5/8 of an inch mark. To be really careful to get everything nice and flat here. Do a couple stitches forwards and backwards. Sometimes it's easier for me to just unpin. Get that lined up there. So now that this has been stitched, we can admire our work, turn it over. Now nothing's been pressed here, but I'm going to press the seam open. So there's our flounce, all nice and pressed. And then the underside is here, and I'll just do a little bit of hand stitching along that seam. And then once my dress is complete, we'll figure out a way to machine stitch this to the dress. But this curvy piece, if we look at it like this, is that piece that goes there, like so. All right, what do you think? I think it's going to look pretty cool. Now, of course, I still have the rest of the dress to make and all of that good stuff, but follow us on social at BERNINA of Naperville because you are sure to see this on Instagram, Facebook, I mean, even another YouTube video. And I'll be wearing it at Bernina University, so maybe I'll try to suck it in, tuck it in, and take a little selfie so that you guys can see how it turned out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you could do me a favor and hop on over to our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel, it's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville. And there, like, comment, and subscribe. We love to hear from you. And in the meantime, I got a lot of sewing to do. See ya.